So we have two speakers coming up that I had the privilege. I was doing some research, and I'm new to this concept still, and so I'm refining an understanding of what it means to work with animals that perhaps might be a little more tolerant to severe drought than other animals. And different breeds can handle certain things better than others. And so there are a lot of you who I've heard have asked and inquired with FiberShed, I'd like to start raising sheep, even if it's 2 sheep or 3 small homestead backyard, expanded backyard programs. And I think about trying to answer those questions, and I can't myself, but so in the process of educating ourselves as a community, if you ask those questions to me now in the face of the fact that we might have an El Nino and we might get the rain we need for this year, we are on a trajectory towards a warmer, drier region as a whole. So how can we become resilient? And one of the ways you heard this morning was about increasing the water holding capacity in the soil through increasing the carbon capture. So resilience and amelioration wrapped together. But now we've looked at the soil, you've looked at some of the policy supports to help you do this work. It's emergent, your RCDs are here for you. The next layer is who is on that land? The animals, the ungulates. And Sandy Wallace, I just want to say, next year we'll focus on alpacas because she told me they're very drought tolerant, and I'm sorry I wouldn't have time to include alpacas in the Yeah, so alpaca. You raise Surrey or Wakaya? They're camels. So if you want a drought-tolerant, soft animal with really long necks and beautiful eyes, and there's many things we could say that are endearing about them, they are basically camels, camelids. So another drought-tolerant strategy. So I'd like to introduce from the sheep side of it, Debbie Bradford, who is, she was born and raised on a cattle ranch, and she is in Mendocino County, and she's been raising Navajo Churro sheep since 1989. And she is an educator as well, and she is also an animal manager and land manager who has a wealth of knowledge with a heart to share that. So that's why we've invited her today, and thank you for coming all this way. And Debbie, are you ready? And Jessica, her student.
Thank you. Johnny. Okay, see what I do, one of the things I also do is run a countywide independent youth group for any kid in Mendocino County who wants to do sheep. And I get mostly city guy kids because I let them keep their sheep at my house. They get to pick out lambs. They get to, okay, I'm supposed to do a count. I hate these things. Oh, like that? Oh, okay. Okay, sorry, can you guys hear? Yes. Okay, fine. So what, they don't have to pay for the sheep, they don't have to pay for the feed, they come and they work. And that's because when I was a kid in 4-H, first girl in Mendocino County to show a steer. Anyway, you know, you get your sheep as a kid when you're, it's like, you know, like April. You feed your sheep for 3 or 4 months, you sell it for big bucks, you know everything about sheep. Wrong. So anyway, my sheep is the Navajo Churro, and I found it, I was a major in biology, and I didn't even think that there were endangered livestock breeds, okay? Never occurred to me until 1989, when I was asked to lead a group of 4-H kids and show them different wool breeds and meat breeds. So I found an endangered breed of sheep, critically endangered at that point, less than 400 in the world. Supposedly, well, in this part of the world, I take it back. So I got some, and I really like them. Okay, now history of the sheep real quick. Anybody here know about Abraham and Muhammad? Yeah, okay. These are the sheep they had, okay? This is a very, very, very old desert-bred sheep. Never been improved, really. Okay, they spread through Eastern Europe, they spread through they were in the Middle East, they spread through Eastern Europe, Middle East, North Africa, came to Spain, brought to America in 1540 with Coronado, killed off in Spain. 4 horns is a sign of the devil. This is one of 5 breeds worldwide that can have multiple horns. Robin, if wherever she is, has Jacobs. They have 4 horns too. Anyway, and they come in a multitude of colors, like at least 15, which makes it not boring for me. Anyway, so they came here. Conquistadors brought them here, gave them to, yeah, she's going to show you. Here's some nice, here's a 6-month-old ram, and here's a guy that's like 3 years old. That's called Phil Not-a-You, because the guy who got him was getting 30 ewes, and he had 29 ewes and Phil Not-a-You. Anyway, they came to the Southwest, another desert area. Spain, a desert area. Now they're in California, a desert area, because of the drought. Okay, so they're very hardy. They can eat any kind of food. They don't need special worming. They don't need lots of attention vet-wise or anything. Very hardy legs and feet. And I shear twice a year because they can have up to 13 and 14 inches of wool. And Matt, who's here somewhere, there he is. He shears my sheep twice a year. And if I'd known he was shearing sheep, I would have saved some to bring down here for you guys to see. But nobody told me about this. Anyway, so very hardy. They don't, as I said, don't require a lot of fancy food. They don't need to be wormed every 6 weeks or month. And I worm twice a year because I take some to the fairs and other places. I also send sheep to Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, to the Navajo. They get them free. Our group has sent over 867 sheep, I think now, and thousands of fleeces. So anyway, it's a really neat breed, and if you want to come look, I've got skulls here. One 4-horn where the sheep had a fight, so you can't really tell. One that's a regular 2-horn, one that's a fused 4-horn. I've had sheep that have had 6 horns. As a matter of fact, there's one that went to the Boonville Fair that had 5. That was last year. So anyway, anybody have any questions? I'm going quick because I don't know how much the next person needs.
How do they do in a temperate, wet condition?
Well, you know what? Since they have such a nice long fleece, they're nice and warm, and they stay outside in snow and rain. Okay, there's now over 5,000 of them, so we're off the critical list. However, they're all over the states. They're up in Canada, they're down in Mexico, they're over in Maine, they're a lot on the East Coast. There's a fair number in the Midwest. There's quite a few in the South, more in the Southwest and northern states like Oregon, Washington, also here. Okay, any other?
Can you say the name of the breed again?
Can I use Navajo Churro? It's kind of like the churro that you eat, only this is a sheep. And I did bring lots of other pictures, lots of information on how to register them, because this is a breed that there was no registry before 1987. And we don't register, none of our sheep are registered at birth because they have registered parents. Because if I went through all of the, all right, I'll go quickly. Okay. In the 1800s, 1850s, there was an old saying that my husband still resents. He's Apache. Okay. The only good Indian is a dead Indian. Let's kill off everything they like. So in the Southwest, they killed off peach orchards for the Apache. Navajo had the sheep. They just killed off buffalo. They killed off everything. It went from 300,000 Navajo Churro sheep down to a couple of thousand by 1880. Then they brought in from the woolen mills back east fine wooled breeds of sheep. This is one of the coarsest breed wools in the world. And of course, with a lot more lanolin in the desert, sand, wind, wane, they got bogged down. They died by the hundreds and hundreds. Not the churro, but the half-breeds. But then in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, and actually still going on in some spots in Arizona, the I'm going to say white people, and I'm sorry. This is how a Navajo lady told me this story. She said that she was this high when the white men came to her grandmother's hogan. She told me, because I was the one speaking English. I mean, I'm her right now. She said they talked to her because she spoke English. She was required to go to an Indian school to speak English. Anyway, told Grandma, put all your sheep in the pen. So she told Grandma to put all the sheep in the pen. And then the guy and this other man killed all the sheep in the pen in front of her. Okay, I met her when she was 80, and I just sent her 3 ewes and a ram. And she said her ancestors had come back. It was the first time she'd ever had these sheep, ever, and since then. Okay, this happened all over the Southwest. It's still happening. They're cutting fences. They're trying to get the Navajo relocated. And the only reason why is because to the Navajo, the entire land is sacred. They don't want them digging for oil and gas and uranium and things. So anyway, that's so that by 1975, there were less than 50 of these sheep that were purebred, and quite a few that were half-bred or part-bred. So anyway, that's why we're building it up. But, 15 colors, extra horns, this is cool. So anybody have any other questions?
What can we do to support and work with and work in partnership with particularly these indigenous communities to support them to
Well,
get back in touch with their ancestors?
What I'm doing is I'm providing free sheep and free wool. And like I said, I've donated a lot. And I'm doing this out of a very tiny paycheck of mine. Some of them need help getting out here because my truck wouldn't even probably make it this far. Okay, so they're coming from Arizona, Utah, New Mexico, and they sometimes need help with money for gas and a place to stay because sometimes they don't want to just turn around and drive another 15 hours or 20 hours back.
They go to Mendocino to pick up the
They come to my place to pick up the sheep. And actually, 2 years ago, I had a family that had never seen the Pacific Ocean or a redwood, so I took them there too. That was very cool. Anyway, so that's what they need, is something like that. They also come to the National Heirloom Exposition every year now, and they come to the Boonville Fair. And anybody who wants to buy a rug or anything like that, that helps them too. Because hay is expensive there. It's not as expensive there as here, but it's very expensive. And speaking of hay is getting more expensive, which means livestock people are going to have more and more trouble because they're all going to grapes instead of hay, and they're exporting hay, and hay went from $20 a ton to over $300 a ton. So, okay, any other questions? No other questions. So it's the Santa Cruz person.
I'm not from Santa Cruz.
I know, but somebody has to introduce her, and it's this lovely lady here. Thank you.
Debbie, thank you. Thank you, Debbie. So the next presenter is Lynn Moody, and you're a professor at Cal Poly?
Yeah, semi-retired.
Semi-retired, and she has brought back another heritage breed, which she will tell you more about. And I loved hearing this story, and I felt like it was, again, another story of strong genetics and keeping that on our planet. And I got that sense when I spoke with you about your sheep. So I will let you explain who they are and what they do.
Thank you. So I just push a button or something?
Yeah, you can press, your formatting looked a little different,
Yeah, I'm not too surprised.
but I could so.
Okay, so, I'm sorry, what do I just push the arrow? Oh, okay, thank you. All right, well, thank you for inviting me. We actually started out, oh man, the formatting did get kind of weird, sorry about that, but anyway, if you can't read a slide, just yell or wave at me or something and I'll figure out what it says. But we started out with Navajo Churro sheep, and I love them dearly. We still have a few. But they're a lot, a lot of breeders of Navajo Churro who do a much better job than I ever did. So we decided to concentrate on the Santa Cruz Island sheep. So there's a picture of a mother and a baby. And today I just want to briefly go through the history and some of their characteristics, the way that they adapted to the island, and a little bit about the island. And then talk about my experiences with them a little bit and why they're a really good choice for the arid West. And if I go too long, just cut me off. So, all right, so there's the map on the left shows California, and you all know all about that. But Santa Cruz Island, quite a bit further south of here, just offshore Santa Barbara. And it's an extension of the Santa Monica mountain range. So that mountain range runs kind of east-west. And a few random, kind of semi-random facts, although it has a lot to do with the adaptation of these sheep. The island itself is about 96 square miles and about 62,000 acres. It has a marine temperate climate, or what is often called a Mediterranean climate, which is what a great deal of California is supposed to have. And it's kind of characterized by warm, dry summers and cool, moist winters. And you all know all about that. Average rainfall on Santa Cruz Island is about 15 inches at the shoreline, and then the orographic effect takes over, and the rainfall rises to about 20 inches in the mountains. You can tell, I hope, from the satellite photo on the upper right, that it's pretty rugged. It's pretty rugged terrain. Frosts are frequent in the interior valleys, and natural water includes 5 perennial streams, and as well as groundwater and springs. But those are likely to dry up in a drought year. Whoa. Yeah, I have a little bit of, anyway, the Spanish discovered the island in 1542. The Chumash Native Americans lived on it since about 7,000 years ago, as near as we can figure, and the Spanish removed them off the island in about 1822, and it was not their choice. So the Spanish discovered the island in about 1542, and they claimed it as a territory or a colony, well, not a colony, but a territory of Spain in 1769. The first sheep on the island were probably, as near as we can figure from reading old records and so on, the first sheep were brought to the island in about 1853 to 1855. And there was a company, Baron Forbes and Company, which was a sort of a conglomerate. Eustace Barron was one of the principals of that organization. And he decided to go into the sheep ranching, so he purchased some, quote, Spanish sheep, which we think were probably merinos and maybe some churras or combinations. And what they called in the old records Lancastershire sheep. And if you looked at Sheep 101 on the internet, there's no such thing as a Lancastershire sheep. So we think most likely that was some sort of Leicester sheep. I don't see much point in reciting this to you. You can read it on your own if you really want to. But the thing I wanted to highlight is that at periodic times, periodic years in the 1800s, Shaw or other people kept bringing in breeds of sheep, mostly merinos and sometimes Leicesters, and then later on in the history, which we'll take a quick look at, they began bringing in Rambouillet. But anyway, in 1869, the company sold the island to a group of investors, and one of the principals of that group of investors, which were based in San Francisco, was Justinian Care. In the mid kind of 1870s, there was a horrendous drought, and so feed on the island was very scarce. And so, quote, thousands of sheep were slaughtered to provide meat and tallow. Before the 1870s, in the 1860s, the sheep were shorn of their nice merino and Leicester type wool, and that wool mostly went into making uniforms and blankets for soldiers in the Civil War. So, and then of course, meat also. In about 1880, Kerr brought in Rambouillet and merinos, and this photograph on the right was taken by Helen Kerr, who was Justinian Kerr's daughter, and shows the ships transporting the sheep to the island. That photo is dated in 1880. By the early 1900s, many of the sheep had gone feral because, as many of you know, I'm sure, sheep are really good at sneaking through fences. And so in this rugged terrain that characterizes the island, there wasn't any way really with the resources they had to keep them confined to a certain part of the island. But after all, it is an island. How far can they go, right? In 1878, the Nature Conservancy acquired, did I say 1878? Oh, sorry, I'm back in the 1800s still. In 1978, the Nature Conservancy acquired the biggest part of the island. And do you remember how Santa Cruz Island, in that satellite photo and in the map, it was shaped kind of like a figure eight, flopped over on its side? And on the eastern side, there's a little figure eight. And on the western side, there's a big lobe of the figure eight, and then in between, there's a little isthmus connecting those two areas. The 76% that went to the Nature Conservancy was the big bulge, the big lobe of that figure eight, and including the isthmus. And the other 24% was the eastern lobe of the figure eight. So hopefully, maybe that helps keep a picture in your mind. The other 24% of the island on the small lobe of the figure eight went to Guarini ownership until about 1984. And from the period of time, 1979 to 1984, it was under the management, the Guarini part of the island was under the management of William and Michelle Peterson. All right, and they were the last people to actually try to carry on a sheep ranching enterprise. The photographs you see down below are all from a book by Michelle Peterson. It's called Once Upon an Island. And they had to end their sheep enterprise in 1984 when William Peterson, trying to land an airplane on Santa Cruz Island, crashed, and he wasn't killed, but he was injured pretty seriously. So then that was kind of like, Michelle had trained herself to be very good at handling the sheep, but it was a bit much for one person plus the ranch hands. So at that point, and then also because of some changes in land management priorities that were done by the Guarini family, the sheep enterprise ended in 1984. And the Petersons removed as many sheep as they could, but there were still a lot of sheep left on the island. So in the period 1979 to 1981, the Nature Conservancy sponsored a study of the feral sheep, the wild sheep, feral sheep on the island, and the population was estimated a little more than 21,000. And most of those sheep were slaughtered to try to help the recovery of the native vegetation and also native wildlife that depended on the vegetation on the island. However, the American Minor Breeds Conservancy, which is kind of the ancestral of the Livestock Conservancy that we have now, that organization, they heard about it. Too late to stop the slaughter, but they did go in with a team of volunteers, and they rescued 5 ram lambs and 7 ewe lambs. And then later on, I don't know, a year or two later, the Nature Conservancy live caught 6 more sheep and contributed those to the Livestock Conservancy. In 1997, the National Park Service, which acquired that piece of land from the Guarinis, remember that's the small part of the island, that 24%, estimated that they had 2,300 sheep on that part of the island. And the sheep probably, because the island, because of its rugged terrain and not real great fencing, was pretty porous, so the sheep could go back and forth. So I dare say some of the sheep they counted had come from the western part of the island, and some were descended from the Peterson sheep enterprise. The National Park Service decided to try to catch the sheep live and relocate them to the mainland, and hooray. So they eventually, by 1999, they recovered over 6,000 sheep, and then a few more in 2001. So that's not that long ago. So this is all pretty recent history. Okay. So that study that I mentioned that the Nature Conservancy sponsored was done by Dirk van Vuren and his co-worker Bruce Koblenz, and they eventually wrote and published this article, Population Characteristics. So most of the information I'm going to present on this slide and the next slide comes from that article. So there's the reference if you're interested in such things. So left to themselves, and these are feral sheep we're talking about, they breed in July and August, so then the lambs are born from mid-December to mid-January. And those are really smart sheep, because that coincides with the rainy season, right? Assuming we get a rainy season, which we always hope for. Twinning was rare. They very seldom found any ewes with twins. After the first few weeks following their birth, the lamb survival was very high. They sampled the ewes, well, I won't go into that in some detail, but 90% of the ewes they sampled during the study were pregnant or lactating. So they either were pregnant or they had a lamb. 63% of 1.5-year-old ewes were pregnant or lactating. So they start breeding pretty early. And, many, I don't have the number, many ewes first conceived at 7 months old. I know, that's really young. When I breed the Santa Cruz Island sheep, I usually wait, I always, so far, have waited till they're 1.5 years or 2 years old. Because just because they can have a baby doesn't necessarily mean they should. But maybe I'm anthropomorphizing. I don't know. Okay, so you've got this island, and it's got a big flock of sheep on it, and the sheep organize themselves into small groups. So the group size range from 1 to 41, and I think you could hardly call one sheep a group, but that's what they called them. And then most of the groups were 7 or fewer sheep. And I've noticed that with my flock, that they will organize themselves into groups of 3 to 6, because I don't have as many, I don't have thousands of sheep, at least not yet. So they organize themselves into smaller groups. Each group has a home range, and it's about a little over 500 acres for the rams, and a little bit less for the ewes, but with quite a wide range of acreage. Their body condition, Van Vuren and Koblenz, they found the body condition of the sheep was good, even during the dry season. The rams had the best condition right before breeding in June, and the ewes had their best condition in November, right before lambing. Alrighty, and that kind of makes sense, because lactation is hard on ewes, as I'm sure you know. A few people, did various degrees of management or exploitation of the island. Clifford McElrath managed the Justinian Care Ranch when it was under that ownership. And he saw that the major predators were golden eagles and ravens. Now, golden eagles are not indigenous to Santa Cruz Island. So what happens is that the use of insecticides like DDT caused eggshell thinning in the indigenous bald eagles, which kind of belonged on the island, were indigenous. And then as the bald eagles died off, the golden eagles moved in and took over that territory. Well, bald eagles eat fish or carrion. Golden eagles are more likely to be predatory. So one of the major predators on the island were the golden eagles. And also ravens would try to attack the newborn lambs if something scared or distracted the ewe. When feed was scarce, so they had the feral sheep, and then they had the more recently brought over Rambouillets and Merinos. When feed was scarce, the wild sheep did better than the domestic sheep. And you kind of, that's kind of intuitive, I would think. The wild sheep would browse on shrubs on hillsides, and they would come into the valley only if they needed to get water. And then I love this quote from McElrath: "The sheep are like deer in some respects. When they see a rider," because they used to herd the sheep with, They used to herd the sheep from horseback. When they see a rider, instead of heading down the hill for the valley or flatland, they head for the highest and roughest country. So then there's various other people made some observations. So my husband and I first acquired our Santa Cruz Island sheep starter flock in 2010 from a gentleman named Marion Stanley, who lives near Bradley, California, not too far from where I live. And then later on, we bought 2 rams from a breeder in Oregon. And then we got 3 more ewes from a breeder near Santa Paula, the Peroskis. There's a little summary of our climate: 10 to 15 inches of rainfall, and our winter lows typically are in the teens. Occasionally we get into single digits, but I don't want that to happen anymore, so let's not think about that. And summer highs regularly in the hundreds. And our sheep graze on pasture and on brushland, we supplement that with hay when forage is of poor quality or in short supply. And one of the reasons we feed hay is because we're trying to maintain some wool quality. So that's the stuff they eat, just pretty much what what other sheep eat: grass and all that, and brooms. And they'll eat forbs. They'll nibble on native shrubs and sometimes not so native shrubs. They're pretty thrifty, partly because they're small. They don't drink much water. A lactating ewe will drink typically less than a gallon per day by our estimate. And then they will drink very little when the pasture is green. The Marion Stanley line, which makes up the majority of our flock, they have really hard hoofs. And I think that's an adaptation to the rocky island already. And it kind of makes sense, but you do have to trim their hoofs pretty frequently. Most of our sheep are white, and white is a dominant, genetically dominant. When you breed a brown sheep to a white sheep, you'll get a white lamb, unless there happen to be a couple recessive browns. They typically have non-woolly faces, they have non-woolly legs, short or no wool on their bellies, and some have a rat tail, which means they don't have wool, just some hair on their tails. And we don't dock their tails. We've never had a problem with fly strike on their butts because of manure clogging up. So they don't seem to be subject to that. The rams are wary and more docile, I found, than other breeds we have. The sheep in general are alert, smart, wary, agile, quick, and quiet. They're much quieter than our churros. Okay, not that the churro is a noisy sheep, it's not, but the Santa Cruz Island are even quieter. And then they're very trainable to electric fence. Their wool, and I brought a couple bags of wool. One of the bags is promised to Kelly Dunage. I don't know if she's here, but anyway. And the other is just for you to mess around with and look at. And I also brought some yarn, so if you want to look at that. And I'll stand by the table and kind of try to explain what the yarn is. But anyway, there's a lot of genetic diversity in their wool. The staple ranges from 1 inch And some of the sheep with a short staple like that tend to shed their wool yearly. And sometimes on a 1-year fleece will have a staple up to 3 inches. It's very crimpy, very springy, very soft and fine. It's really nice. Oh, and this vest I'm wearing, which it's getting really hot, but it is wool. I made this out of Santa Cruz Island wool. So, and the colors are natural. Lots of dirt, especially the last few years when we've been in this drought. Our area where we live is very dusty. So the wool, the lanolin helps the wool stick. It helps the dust stick to the wool. So I love the wool. I work with it all the time. And there's some pictures. There, see the upper left, our very nice llama, Georgie. She's a good babysitter, letting the lambs climb up. And just various pictures. The ram in the bottom middle, that's one of our senior rams, Butch Cassidy. So I forget if I mentioned, but they are small sheep. The rams will typically be maybe 100, 120 pounds. The ewes 80, 90, maybe 100 pounds. Again, there's a lot of diversity. It depends on the different lines. There's 3 yearling rams in this photo. The one on your left and then the one kind of in front, those are Santa Cruz Island rams. And the one in the middle is a Navajo Churro ram. And you can see the difference in size. They're just about the exact same age, almost to the day. So there's quite a big difference in size there. All right. And that's it. Yay. So I'm sorry I went a bit over, but. Oh, yeah, sure. I'm happy to take lots of questions.
Does anyone have Leslie?
That's a really good question. I think that a lot of the sheep developed the ability to shed their wool yearly. We have one ewe named 7 of 9, and she's a shedder. So her wool, if you don't shear her every year, her wool can develop a weak place in the fiber, a wool break, in other words. And it has nothing to do with her health. She's a very healthy ewe and an excellent mother. Because she is such an excellent mother and she's very cute, we keep breeding her. And if we breed her to a ram who's not a shedder, usually the lambs have been good. But anyway, I think a lot of the sheep develop the ability to shed their wool periodically. If not annually, then maybe every 2 or 3 years. So nothing like that Shrek, you know, that merino in New Zealand or whatever. Yeah, nothing like that. So at least I think that probably that these sheep were feral probably has to do also with why there's so much lanolin in the wool. I don't know if that's typical or not. I'm sure they inherited part of that from their merinos, but they do have a lot of lanolin, and it sheds, you know, when it rains, if our sheep don't go into the shelter, they shed water like little ducks. So it's kind of neat. Yes? Yeah. So the question was, why did they keep bringing sheep to the island? And because it was so very rugged. They did a lot of different enterprises on the island. I've only talked about the sheep, but they also raised wine grapes, and they raised olives for oil, olive oil. They had cattle, they had horses, they bred horses on. So they did do a lot of different things. But most of the livestock was sheep, and I think it's because sheep can get along on very sparse pickings and with very little attention. Basically, they would round them up once a year on horseback, shear them, dip them, do whatever, castrate the rams that they didn't want to keep for breeding, and then load them up onto boats and ship them off to the mainland for sale. So they pretty much had to get along on their own, and they were good at it. Yes?
Well, a lot of islands don't have
I'm sure that had a lot to do with it, and it is true that there aren't any native or indigenous canines or felines on the island. So. Okay, I can take questions at the table. And I have some yarn I'd like to show you too, so.